Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video we're doing the final stages of the Knight Cerastus Lancer. The last couple of weeks you've seen me doing the shield, sort of all demonic and nasty, and then we did the flesh banner that's hanging between the Knight's legs. So in this one we're going to finalise it off by doing the rest of the Knight Lancer body, the damages, the kind of pustules, the nurgleization and the cracked and chipped paint. Now a lot of this paint scheme is very, very similar to the Knights that I did last year on the channel from the rest of my Nurgle army. So if you've seen all those, this will just be a variant of kind of what I did on those videos. Hopefully it'll keep you entertained anyway. If you've never seen what I did on those other Knights, look, check the channel. There's a Knight playlist on there with all different ways of doing Nurgle Knights, from super demonic just to a little bit damaged, so check that out. So stage one with the Knight you've seen there. I'm not going to go through the build, but I built it kind of as standard, kept the shield off because we're doing that separately obviously, and stage one is battle damage because these are meant to be vehicles that have fought all over the galaxy, and it's Nurgle, so they're not going to be super repaired. So just using the hobby knife you saw there to scrape off some details, take off some chunks and chipping from, you know, trimming everything, then using a pin drill just to drill some sort of bullet holes into the armour panels and widen it out with a hobby knife. The final stage, take some clippers and literally just clipper off the edges of some armour panels, might be cables, whatever really takes your fancy, just to add to that battle damage effect. And you'll see that as I go through this build stage, it's all over the model. Now I've mixed up some milliput, which is like a two-part epoxy resin, stuffed it into random areas across, and these are meant to be kind of Nurgle growth areas. What I've then taken is some little balls that again are made of milliput or green stuff that I've made over the course of months when I had any spare. Push that into the milliput so it sets in. Use the end of a sculpting tool just to dot some detail across there and add some texture so it looks like this Nurgly skin. Now here's the next stage. If you watch the channel a lot, you'll know I do a lot of blue stuff casting, where we'll cast up parts. Now these are cast up pieces from a Glockkin model that I've cast up using blue stuff, put some green stuff in there to make it a really, really thin layer of green stuff, and you can see that I'm slicing them out from what I've moulded previously and literally super gluing these into areas across the models. One tip, when you put super glue under these, push it down with something like a cocktail stick or whatever. If you use your hand, it can push out and you're gluing your thumb to it. Now if you want to know more about blue stuff casting and how to make things with green stuff, just check that on my channel again. I'll link that down below, but there's a lot of stuff on the channel for how to do these conversions. So once you've got all these cast up green stuff parts all over the model, I'm taking liquid green stuff you saw there and putting it around the edges of those cast up parts to kind of blend it into the model. And that next stage blending carries in when we get the paint done. So we've sprayed it black and we sprayed lead belcher, talk more about that later. Then we're taking Games Workshop of Grell and Earth, putting it around the areas where we've put those green stuff castings on, but also onto other random areas across the model. Now what this texture paint does, when it dries, it cracks, and you will see this as we get closer, as we go through the normal paint scheme. It cracks, makes it look sort of all old, flaking off paint. Now we're on to the proper painting. We're starting off with Games Workshop Retributor Armour on all of the trim across the entire model. We want it to look aged, we want it to look interesting, we'll Nurgle it up later. Rack our flesh onto those pustule areas and onto the areas where you've moulded on that milliput detail to make it look like it's Nurgling. What you can also do, and in a couple of places, where I've put that liquid green stuff, I've also put it on some flat areas, and then I've painted that with the Rackar flesh as well to look like an area that's just starting to become sort of demonic. After we've done that, we're going to paint the pustules yellow that's moulded into that Glockkin model, and some details in that Screamer pink where there's these Nurgle symbols pushing through as well. And what we're going for across the model is to try and make it look like this sort of demonic possession is taking place, pushing out of the armour panels and really kind of beginning to take the Knight over. I've done one leg, as you'll see here, with lots of castings of the same piece where there's like several skulls coming out of the armour. So I thought it was interesting to do just one leg like that. So there's almost like patches across the model being taken over in different ways. Some red detailing on the end of the lance, a couple of the cables you see in there, and then onto the Abaddon black that goes on the cables, and it also goes into kind of the socket pieces between the legs. Now we're onto the main body of the armour colour. So this is going with my Death Guard, so I'm using Death Guard green. You know, if you were taking it to your normal Nurgle army, or even if you were doing this to like be representing Zeesha or Khorne, you'd do maybe different armour. Now when you're painting this on, it's important to remember, don't get too precious about where this goes. So where you've drilled those bullet holes or you're taking chunks out of the armour, you could leave the metallic showing through on that point, and that's the beauty of a lead belcher spray. Saves you a mountain of time. When you're putting it over the flaky area where the Grell and Earth is set, try not to get it in between the cracks of the flaky paint, because what you want it to look like is it's flaking off and you can see the silver underneath. Other than that, Nice normal layers. You know, you want to just, a couple of thin layers is always better than one big thick one. And just work your way over the panels till you're happy with the level of detail you've got. But this was saying earlier about the lead belcher spray saves a massive amount of time. You'll notice in this painting scheme, we don't go anywhere near the standard armour on the legs or anywhere around there. So really is a time-saving event. Now onto the wash stage. So this is a dirty sepia ink wash from Vallejo. This will really grind down the model. If you've watched, again, lots of things on the channel, I tend to bounce between using the Vallejo sepia wash and the Games Workshop Seraphim sepia. Now the Vallejo one is very, very dirty, so absolutely ideal for kind of Nurgle. Hopefully you see on the left joint there, you still see it very wet. You'll see the fleshy area where I've put the liquid green stuff and then painted that without having any pustules there. So this is after the wash has dried. You'll see it's really, really manky and dirtied up all the armour panel areas and everything. But the metallics, it looks rusty, it looks aged, so it's going to be left on the metallics generally. Now, the only technique now, I'm not putting the paint description up on the left there as you've seen to the rest of the video, because same paints we've already used. I'll put in the full description at the end if you want to know exactly which paints and you want a list. But this is going back over the model with the exact same paints you've already used, but not covering the full areas. So we're working halfway between like a dry brush and a sort of wet brush here. So we don't want to cover every last part of the pieces we've already done. You want to be putting all the paints back on, but on the raised areas, on the tops of those surfaces, in a kind of dry brush and highlight fashion, if that makes any sense, to lift the colours back up, but still leaving all the darker colours in the recesses and all that kind of nice shade mankiness in there. Now this is the first new colour. This is Mortari and Grime, and this is something new I've been experimenting with. This is what's slightly different to the previous Nurgle models I've done. We're taking that Mortari and Grime and putting it over every last Retributor armour panel, and it really kind of puts a nice slightly green sheen to it and pulls the colour together a little bit. So we're not going back over it with Retributor armour. Now when you're going back over the armour panels, what you want is a slightly watery paint that you're putting back over, and you will see how many times I'm going back over those areas. We want to see the grime showing through and those streaky areas showing through the paint to make it look like Nurgle armour. So you can be very careful how much you're putting on. Not too much, not too little, kind of spread it around. Now we're using a couple of contrast paints to make those fleshy areas look a bit more demonic. The first one we're going into is a Majos Purple, dropping it onto the fleshy areas, but we're also bringing it out to the areas where the paint has cracked, maybe dropping it onto some of the armour, again, just to make it look a little bit more possessed. And then a little bit of Plague Bearer flesh for the same reason on the fleshy areas, onto kind of the skulls, and even onto the paint, just to bring out that demonic possession. Nylon Oxide, brilliant paint, cannot do a Nurgle army without it, because obviously normal metal rusts, and we've dealt with that with the sepia shade over all the normal metal, but the brass areas, they oxidise, and it's a really nice kind of blue manky brassy effect. And finalising off with something that every Nurgle player should have, the technical paint Nurgle's Rot, and we're dropping this on top of all the pustules, streaking it down. That will really finish off the armour area nicely. What I then did is I thought that the kind of lance needed a bit of a slight blue glow, so not putting much on, not covering the whole thing, but just that Pilar Glacier across little bits of that lance to give a slight glowy effect. So here we are, essentially the paint scheme is finished. We are all done. I have given it a spray of varnish and then glued back on the shield and the flesh banner between the legs. If you're interested in how I've done those, again, check the last two videos out. I think it really comes together quite nicely, the sort of demonic effect, the kind of gross, fleshy banner effect. So yeah, one point to note, when I did varnish it, you do have to go back over with some of that Nurgle's rocks. It does kind of dull it down a little bit. But yeah, hope you like that. I really enjoyed this scheme. It's really nice to see the model coming together, and definitely looking forward to getting this in use on the tabletop, which I'm doing fairly soon down at Warhammer World. So yeah, if you like that, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and I will see you on another video.